Good afternoon. Good afternoon. You hear that? You hear that sound? I don't want to hear that anymore. Mom. Yes, that was just an example. Please turn off your cell phones at this time. Thank you. Couple of announcements. It is Glass Month, which the mayor can tell you about. And if you haven't seen our exhibit upstairs, you should. Several community members have loaned us glass for that, and it goes on until the end of the month. But there's a tour on April 26th, if you'd like to join us at Island Mold and Machine, which is actually in Fulton, August 26th at 1 p.m. Just let me know that you'd like to go, and I can let them know how many to expect. Thursday at 7 p.m., the third class in our Vietnam series, which will cover the Gulf of Tonkin, incident and resolution. And James Siekmeyer, who's a history professor from West Virginia University, will be teaching that class. So that's this Thursday. Next Tuesday, along the glass theme, American Glass is a new novel by Christina Fazanik, who's been here a few times. And she'll be telling you about her novel. And in 2 weeks, Holly McCluskey will be here. She's the curator of glass at the Museum's Vogelby Institute, and we'll talk about the history of wheeling glass. Today we have with us a Warwood man, like me, and he's an author and historian who currently serves on the Eberly College of Arts and Sciences Visiting Committee at West Virginia University. Dr. Charles Dusch, he is a founding member of the U.S. Space Force History and Heritage Program and the former command historian of the United States Air Force Academy. A recipient of 3 Department of the Air Force Excellence in History Awards, Dr. Dusch has published for the Institute of National Security Studies, Sorbonne University Presses, Air University Press, Naval Institute Press, the Journal of Military History, and International Encyclopedia of the First World War, among others. His teaching assignments include the United States Air Force Academy, Regis University, the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs Campus, and West Virginia University. He's a retired Air Force Weapons Systems officer with over 2,000 flight hours in RF-4C Phantom II and F-115E Strike Eagle aircraft, including 28 combat missions over Iraq and Bosnia. And his book is called Balloon Ace. He has one hard copy available. He'll tell you more about it. And numerous softcover. Here is Dr. Charles Dusch.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Thanks to Sean and the staff here at the Ohio County Public Library. This is an honor for me to be here. You know, I've been watching online from far away for many, many years, and this is just a treat to be here. And welcome, and thank you all for coming out today. I will be walking around and sitting and doing some things, so if that's inconvenient for you, I apologize. It's just part of what I was like when I was a history professor. James Siekmeyer is excellent, so if you get a chance to come to his presentation, please do. He's a wonderful historian. I think he was at the State Department for a while as their historian. I need notes because, like I said, I'm a historian and we tend to forget things, so notes kind of keep me on track and from wandering, aimlessly here and not using your time well. The book is about some incredible West Virginians. Lewis Bennett Jr., an amazing young man, and his mother, Sally Maxwell Bennett, who was an impressive woman in her own right. And the context of the book is World War I, the Great War. And in recent years, I see a lot of kind of cavalier expressions about great power conflict from media pundits and politicians. And from my perspective, it's in an historical vacuum. These great power conflicts are particularly destructive in terms of the waste, the damage, the loss, and the suffering on a global scale, national, community, and individual. And that's where I think the Bennett's come in, that their story, this is the story of a family in this Great War context, writ small. And the Western Front, where Lou would fight his battles, is still off limits in several places. The area is poisoned. There are explosives from the Great War that have shut down areas even today in the 21st century. 21st century people have died because they've inadvertently hit one of these bombs or shells from over 100 years ago and were blown up. Where there is agriculture, the farmers, when they plow in the spring, bring up what they call the iron harvest, debris from the war, including artillery shells and bombs from over 100 years ago. And some of the areas are so poisoned from the gases and the chemicals that the animals and the plants there are completely inedible. That's how destructive this war was, and it's not even as big as World War II was. So when we're talking great power competition, that's the combat, that's the context of this war that Louis Bennett is going to be a part of. It is a total war of the industrial age, and that's what he's going to become a part of. Let's see. Okay, so their story is a global story. It's just writ small. It is a family representing what's going to happen to millions around the world, because these are global empires whose colonies in Africa, Asia, even the Americas are going to be involved in this. The book is very much about place. It's a history of place. Here in West Virginia, Appalachia, it's a West Virginia story. And for the Upper Ohio Valley, Wheeling and Warwood and Beach Bottom are going to be central to this story. They're going to play key roles. The networks that the Bennetts developed, Lou Bennett and his mother, are also important. And it's a history of how we as humans do networking to get done what we need to have done. So that's part of this. And then I think the other part of this that stands out to me is how history and myth influence the lives of people at an individual level, community level, nationally, and globally. So the story's going to center on Louis Bennett Jr. He's very, very strong in his loyalty to West Virginia. It's not very well known, that this history of Louis Bennett. And I think those of us who grew up here or have lived in Appalachia, lived in West Virginia, we're not surprised that people from this region developed high technology in the mining industry, bottling industry, oil drilling, breaking the sound barrier, or changing professional sports. So influencing early aviation is just normal to us. We would expect that. Even though many people from outside the region may say, no, it's isolated, it's this, it's that, but it's not at all. It was very well connected to the entire planet. Lou's ideas began really in 1915 when he is a sophomore at Yale. He comes up with the idea of the West Virginia Flying Corps then, a sophomore in college, because he's watching what's happening over in Europe with World War I and says, if we're going to be prepared, this is what we need to do. He doesn't just stop there. He joins the Yale Battery and becomes part of this preparedness movement, takes a job in an aircraft factory, and he learns how aircraft are built and how they're financed. What are the means of production? What needs to happen to make aircraft a business in America? And by the time war breaks out in 1917, I believe he anticipates the defense industrial complex that Eisenhower will talk about in 1950. He is way, way ahead of his time. When war is declared, he has already formulated the idea of a national aviation reserve with squadrons and aircraft and factories and financing from the government and from the private sector as a senior in college. And he goes to the Army and he says, hey, what do we need? What do we need to have one of these squadrons to make them combat ready? And they say, well, we don't know. The Wilson administration wouldn't let us really prepare for war. We're going to send one of your history professors to Canada, and he'll get the answer from the Royal Flying Corps. So Lou goes to the Aero Club of America, one of his networks. These are the leading explorers and aviators around the country. And they tell him, we don't know either. It's all up to you. And Lou says, well, I have a plan. Unfortunately, the Wilson administration did not like the idea of a volunteer organization. But Lou pursued it anyway. And he had the headquarters here in the Schmulbach building in Wheeling. He had his airfield up at Beach Bottom and the factory up in Warwood. And then he brings into his system the Princeton School in New Jersey, a facility in Daytona Beach, Florida, and he was lobbying the DuPont Corporation because he wanted to put one in Delaware. But the Army held all the cards, and the Wilson administration did not want volunteer organizations because President Wilson was scared that Theodore Roosevelt would form a volunteer unit called the Roosevelt Legion, and it would embarrass Wilson publicly. So the Army drafts the pilots and the mechanics of the West Virginia Flying Corps. And Lou Bennett tries to keep it going. They actually put on an air show. They start flying people from the upper Ohio Valley to raise money to keep it going. But he's going to go fight with the British because he knows, one, the Army Air Service is a mess, and two, he's kind of mad at the Army for being so obdurate. From there, his story will join the transnational story of military people from around the world. He'll become a pilot, and a very good pilot, by the way. He'll go to the Western Front and he'll fight, and he'll become a balloon ace. He'll shoot down fixed-wing airplanes, but he goes after balloons in particular. And, you know, my students would say, well, why would anybody want to shoot down a balloon? Isn't that easy? Well, number one, today we have satellites and we have drones. They had balloons. And at that day and age, because aircraft were so unreliable and they kept breaking all the time, and when you read his letters, I don't know how many crashes or how many broke engines he had. But airplanes were unreliable, but a balloon could be tethered to a truck, go up to 3,000 feet, and would be able to communicate directly with the headquarters via telephone. And with binoculars, they could see out to 10 kilometers or 12 miles and see what was happening, report on it, and they could control artillery fires so that people could keep their guys alive. Well, the generals knew that this was important, so they tried to destroy these balloons. And to protect the balloons, they would have aircraft sometimes, they'd have cannon, they'd have machine guns, so these things were well defended. And Lou Bennett is going to go after them. So it's a very dangerous thing that he's undertaking, that he's going to pursue. Let's see. He'll die. That should not be a surprise. He dies in combat. But his ideas will live on through his network, his friends at Yale, who after the war will become assistant secretaries of war, secretaries of defense, and his ideas will continue into the Cold War. And it's really his network that's going to lead him or lead his ideas into the future. So that's kind of a summary of his life, but wait, there's more. Lou grows up steeped in the history and mythology of the Civil War. His mother, Sally Maxwell Bennett, is a Maxwell from Wheeling. And if you know, I think we had a display here at the library one time of the traders in Wheeling. Her dad was a sympathizer with Virginia. So they were labeled as traders in Wheeling. She is a diehard Confederate apologist, and she steeps Lou in this history. He's related to Stonewall Jackson by marriage, and when he's a child, he certainly embraces this. And I think, I tell people, my generation was influenced by the World War II generation. What we learned was what they told us. And that's not unusual. I mean, that's what we do as human beings. And Sally was a diehard believer in this. Lou will eventually try to be his own man, though. And I see it in his letters. He wants to make his own unique mark in this world. That's what Lou Bennett wants to do. And he really, really takes a hard stab at it. And I think it's impressive what this young man achieved at such an early age. He's going to do much of this through technology. He builds a motorcycle as a young man. He builds a car. And he's racing around West and terrorizing the neighborhoods. And he actually makes the newspaper. But that's not unusual. A lot of other aviators do this right before World War I. Eddie Rickenbacker, Charles Lindbergh, Quentin Roosevelt. I mean, it's not unusual that he does this. And some of the problems he'll approach have this Civil War background, like forming a volunteer unit, which was a standard way that Americans would prepare for war back in the day. Going back to like the revolutionary times and the militia. And he's not alone in any of this. When he is developing, when he's at Yale, America is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the American Civil War, and they're celebrating it. The Army is having these preparedness camps. The newspapers are sharing articles about the glories of the Civil War. They're dragging out all the veterans to come to these events. And so America is really much celebrating this, and they're going to build more Civil War memorials, monuments during this period than even after the Civil War. So this is a very strong identification that these Americans have. And Lou getting killed, he follows those Civil War notions of courage and bravery of an individual, not the modern mass tactics of the battlefield of World War I. But he's not alone. If you read what the Europeans and the Americans who were over there before the United States declared war, what they write, they see the Americans come over, the American Army and airmen, and say, wow, these guys are talking in headlines. They're just hurling themselves at the enemy with this immense courage, but they're getting killed in droves. In fact, one German commander at the Battle of Belleau Wood sends a message to his command saying, the Americans are here. We can kill them. We can't stop them. So it was very much an American identity thing, the way that these young men were fighting at this time in history. So that's one of the reasons this Civil War identity plays such a big role in this. His mother's path will follow the changes of the world that are brought on by the Great War. Not just the fact that America gets into the war and we're involved and things are going to get out of control in that regard. War kind of takes off with its own personality. She's going to suffer some pretty serious personal tragedies. And they come at her rapidly, and it's going to, I think, become a metamorphosis. Initially, she's kind of like the ultimate helicopter mom, if you will. When Lou joins or wants to start flying, she's against it. You shouldn't be doing that, And I guess for them, today we have AI and we have cyber. And I don't know about you guys, but to me, it's voodoo magic. I don't get it, but the kids do. It's like water to them. They get it. And I think aviation and radios, which are new at this time, that Lou Bennett embraced, that was just like water to them. It was like, yeah, that's no big deal. She didn't want him to do that. And then when he joins the military, she goes to Canada to try and drag him back. And as I'm reading this, all I could think of, I thought, I hope she didn't do it in front of his squadron mates, because they would not let him be. They would not let that one go. And I have to tell you, as I read these letters from Lou, from the other fighter pilots that were friends of his, I had just been out of the cockpit, maybe 5 years, and they were my buds. I knew them. It was like, I know who these guys are. I would have fit in with them. They would have fit in with us. So it was very much, that's their identity. So Sally, getting back to Sally. Lou goes off to war. Her husband falls ill. And for the last 3 months of his life, she's keeping his books. She's running his company. And she kind of likes it. She's good at it. So when he dies and she brings the body back to Weston, she'd kind of like to keep doing that. But the men of the family, want to spare her any grief. And they say, no, we've got this. We've got this. And she makes it clear she's not happy about it. She thinks they're going to screw everything up and blame her. And she gets a telegram. Her son is missing in action. So she says, I haven't unpacked. They're going to screw this up and blame me. I'm going to go to New York, and I'll let them do what they do. In New York, the mails will get to me faster, and it's a port city. If I need to go to Europe and go get Lou, it's a lot faster. So off she goes to New York. And then there's a global tragedy, even beyond World War I, the so-called Spanish influenza. Now, you guys all remember COVID. This is far worse. And historians today believe maybe 100 million people died from this. Genetically, they have traced it to influenzas in the trenches of 1916, that this was evolving and killing mainly young people. And then in 1918, Sally Maxwell Bennett contracts it in her apartment in New York. And you know how there's these little pads of paper in the hotels? She takes one of these and begins to bare her soul in what is really a deathbed confession, to whom it may concern. And she lays out all of her troubles, her sickness. She feels like she's dying, and she gets a telegram, your son has been killed in action. And she writes, could this be the end of my brave boy? I have suffered so much. It's just too much. And you can see she is in the depths of despair. And I think an ordinary human being might have died from that. That might have just been the nail in the coffin. But Sally Maxwell Bennett was not an ordinary person. Like her son, she was driven. And this rallies her. And she decides, I'm going to go to Europe, and I'm going to find out if, one, he's really dead, and two, if he is dead, I'm going to bring his body back. So she applies for a passport. And they're like, what? No, you're a woman. You can't go over there. Plus, you're a civilian. There's a war on. That was the wrong answer that the State Department gave her. She reaches out to the senator from West Virginia, Senator Sutherland, and the editor of the Wheeling Intelligencer. And she says, I understand you send war correspondents over to Europe. Make me a war correspondent. So they do. She gets a press pass. She gets a passport. She boards the Walmer Castle and sails for Europe. Now, the fighting stopped before she gets over there. But she lands in England, and she wants to resolve her son's estate, meets with the British bureaucracy, and while she's doing this, she says, oh, by the way, his squadron commander said he was given the Distinguished Flying Cross. I don't see it in his effects. And they come back with, we don't award the Distinguished Flying Cross posthumously. Oh, yeah, they did. In fact, the man that he replaced in the squadron was from India, Laddie Roy. He was given the Distinguished Flying Cross posthumously. It's a normal thing in the military that when we do an awards, we do what's called a records check. And so the British bureaucracy reached out to Canada and said, hey, tell us about Louis Bennett. So some bureaucrat in the files in the personnel office goes to the B's, finds Louis Bennett from Brooklyn, New York, looks at the service number, writes Lou's service number at the top of the enlistment paper, and said, Louis Bennett, Brooklyn, New York, deserter from Canada in 1916. And if you look at this guy's enlistment paper, Lou's service number is at the top. They both have identical service numbers except for the very first digit. Oh, it must be a typo. So this has to be the guy. So no award for Lou. And it's a case of mistaken identity. Sally has an extensive global network through the art world. She was an artist. She met lots of artists in New York. And she knows all these British women. Many are mothers whose sons were killed in Europe during the war. And she tells them what she's planning on doing, and they admire her for wanting to bring her son back home. But they can't, because official British policy is they will build these monstrous, beautiful cemeteries to show everyone how Britain won the war, so that nobody's bringing their dead home. Sally thinks that's unjust. Then she goes over to the continent, and she's going from cemetery to cemetery, Belgium and France, looking for her son's body. And while she's there, people learn of her quest, and American women now write to her saying, hey, would you mind looking for my son's grave so we know what happened to him? So she does. And the Army is very, very helpful. They will provide her with data, information, and she helps them too. It's a very collaborative effort. And she finds the graves, she makes maps of the graves, puts flowers on them, sends photos, and the women thank her, and they tell her, oh, by the way, the Wilson administration is saying they're going to break their promise of bringing our war dead home because they want to build these big cemeteries in Europe so they can show everyone how we won the war. And Sally's incensed. And she tells them, that's your job. It's your call. You decide. If you want your son to be buried there, that's fine, but the mothers should be the one, the families should be the ones to bring the dead home. And then she arrives in a town called Wavrin. It's a village in northern France. It's where Lou dies, in the hospital there. And what she finds is horrific. When the Germans left, they dynamited every home, every hospital, every building, including the church. Everything, scorched earth. And these people come back in the middle of winter to nothing. And Sally tells them of their quest. They find Lou's grave, and the parish priest, Father Delanoy, will help her smuggle Lou's body out of the grave there in defiance of French law. I wondered about that till I saw a picture of him, and he was wearing a French soldier uniform, so he had been drafted too. So he got it. And Sally meets these French mothers who admire her for wanting to bring her son back, but they can't because no one knows what happened to their son. They just kind of vanished. Maybe their trench was hit by a one-ton shell and they were buried alive. Maybe they were hit by a one-ton shell and obliterated, but nobody knows. And if you go there today in the church's cemetery, there's a beautiful little brick wall with bronze plaques that commemorate these young men who died in the Great War, just disappeared off the face of the earth. It was a place for the family to grieve. And this is part of Sally's metamorphosis. She understands that she actually has gotten her son back and people have helped her, and these other mothers cannot do that. And I think the injustice of that really struck her. She seems like somebody, to me, who is very strong on demanding justice. And so she realizes, I have the money, I have the will, I have the networks. At the national level, globally, community, I can become a voice for these women who don't have a voice. I can build these monuments that I'll dedicate to my son, Louis Bennett Jr., but I will make them the gift of one mother for all mothers. And she'll do this by building a little chapel in Wavrin because she wants the people to have a place to worship. And she's very, very generous with her gifts to the community, the people who helped her. She meets Emil Merkelbach, who was the balloonist Lou was trying to shoot down, and he gives her the eyewitness account. And she learns from him the suffering that German mothers have undergone from this war. And then she will battle the British bureaucracy, and in Westminster Abbey, she will put in a window to the Royal Flying Corps that really, I think, shows her defiance. They said, well, you can't dedicate it to your son. It has to be generic angels, and we need the U.S. government's approval. So she has the architects or the designers give them a nice little generic picture of what it'll look like, and they approve it. She's mad at the U.S. government So for U.S. government approval, she has them put in the emblem of the West Virginia Flying Corps, which at the center is the state seal of West Virginia, the sovereign state of West Virginia from her perspective, and therefore she has government approval. And then the angel holding the shield of faith has Louis Bennett's face on it. And they don't find this out until it's unveiled. So take that, Britain. But her pièce de résistance, what she does that matters the most to her is the aviator statue. She finds someone from her art network, Augustus Lukeman, who was he did a lot of Confederate memorials during that period. He'll design the aviator statue. She thought she would put it at Yale, but Yale wasn't interested. And that upset her because she thought of all the young men from Yale that Lou knew who died. And I think it's like 40% of his aviator group died. The casualty rates in aviation were very high then, and they're still pretty high in military aviation, but not like they were. Then Lukeman says, well, let's try and put it in Washington, D.C. Well, she met a lot of resistance because, well, it's Washington, D.C. Mason Patrick, who was the chief of the Air Service from West Virginia, tried to help her, but even he couldn't overcome the bureaucracy. But Wheeling and Lindsley reached out to her and says, we would like that statue. We would like an exemplar to teach young people what service and sacrifice meant and what this great war, serving in it, meant. And I think that's, ultimately she will do that. She'll bring the statue here to Wheeling. And if there's any theme in this, both Louis Bennett and his mother become servants. They want to serve the state, Louis with the West Virginia Flying Corps, and he saw that as a way to serve the nation. And he wanted to create that opportunity in every state in the Union so all young men could serve their local community and serve the national community. And Sally, who, yes, she had this Confederate background, she turns it into a new cause, representing women who had no voice. And that was about to change. American women were about to get the vote and become full-up members of the electorate. The Democratic Party in 1924 names her as an alternate delegate. She gets the letter and she calls up Cordell Hall and she goes, hey, is this right? You know I'm a woman, right? He goes, yeah, we want you. And through her service, becoming this voice for all these other women, she becomes recognized. When her son-in-law, Johnson McKinley, dies, she'll move in with her daughter, Agra, here in Wheeling, and she'll help run the businesses and keep them going. She has a full life. And as I went through the primary documents, and let me tell you this, Sally Maxwell Bennett kept everything. Telegrams and the drafts of the telegrams she sent. Letters and the drafts of the letters she sent. Check stubs, tickets, cards, train schedules, the directory of Yale, where Lou was next to the sons of the captains of industry and finance, the Tafts, the Harrimans, the Bushes, the Davisons. You see how well connected he was and who these people were that were going to be the movers and shakers in the 20s and 30s and on. So he was a very well-connected young man. But it's this notion of service, and that ready to serve became the motto for the aviator. And so I think it's very appropriate, that Wheeling and the Upper Ohio Valley has a statue here that remembers Louis Bennett Jr. He's an amazing young man, and his also very formidable mother, Sally Maxwell Bennett. I got to like them after I finished writing the book. It was like, yeah, these are some really good people. And Lou Bennett's kind of an unsung hero, but quite the amazing young man. And I think he died well before his time. He was way ahead of everybody else. So with that, I'll wake you guys up now. And does anyone have any questions for me or any comments or anything you'd like to know? Yes, ma'am. was not married.
Can we repeat the question real
Yeah,
quick?
go ahead, please.
Oh, I asked if he was married.
And he was not married. So like a lot of college males, he dated a lot, he danced a lot. But when he got to Wheeling, he started dating Mary Hayes. And they had a very special relationship. And while he was trying to establish the West Virginia Flying Corps, lobby Congress and lobby the Army, organize, train, and equip the unit, get the airplanes, finance the Flying Corps, learn to fly, command the unit, he was dating Mary Hayes on the side. And he gave her his coat, and when he left for Canada, he gave her his car. And she was very faithful to him, and the letters to him back and forth are very touching. It's clear they had a very serious love for each other. And there is a point where he's been in combat, and for those of you who may have been in combat, you'll know this. There's a point where you know that you're not the same person you were. And he writes to her and tells her, you probably won't like me now, who I've become. And she says, no, I know you'll be the same person. When he dies, she is devastated. And she can't even send a sympathy card to Sally. She's just so devastated. And her mother, Cordelia Hayes, develops a very close relationship with Sally, and at one point says, I really would like you to take the car back. Mary's young. She was probably 16 or 17. And she says, I don't want her to have the car. So Sally writes, and she didn't keep the draft of that letter, so I don't know what she said, but I see Mary's letter. Agony sums it up. And she says, I'll send you the car back, but Lou gave me his coat, and it's all I have of him. Can I please keep it? And Sally writes back, and this is what I think separates her from many upper-class people that I was studying at this time. It was amazing some of the Gold Star mothers who went over to Europe and treated the other people, the Europeans, the Army personnel who were helping them, treated them like servants. Sally writes this mea culpa to her, this confession of, I am so sorry. I was so wrapped up in estate matters that I just sent a dumb letter to you, and I'm paraphrasing, and I should have told you, yes, please keep the code. I'm just so inundated with the estate matters, I just wasn't thinking. Please forgive me. And if Lou doesn't come back, you can keep the car too. I don't care about it. But yes, do keep the code. And throughout Europe, she shows this enormous compassion to these women who have lost their sons too, and these families. When she gets to France, and I know I'm going down a rabbit trail, one of the young women who help her was a collaborator. And the priest says, I really don't want to talk to her because she was sleeping with the enemy. And she goes, well, I need to know what happened. And she makes sure that this young girl gets a gift like everyone else, an expensive gift from Tiffany's, I think it is. So she really has this compassion. So Lou was not married, but it was very clear to me that he and Mary were very tight, and he was leaning in that direction. They had professed love to one another, and I think he would have married her had he lived. So, yes.
Anybody
Yes,
else
sir.
have a question? Hold on.
In the back.
Raise your hand up.
How many statues were made, and are there others in another location?
Only one aviator statue. Sally commissioned, I think, 12 memorials to Lewis, but not all were physical. Let's see, there's the church, the chapel in Wavran, there's the window in Westminster Abbey, the aviator statue, but she donated the family home to Lewis County for a library, and she used Lewis's books and her own personal library to kind of as a starter. An airfield in Lewis County in his name, a tapestry in the church in New York City where he sang as a child, a statue of George Washington to a museum in Paris, and I wasn't able to figure out which museum. A parachute contest, though a parachute wouldn't have saved him. He was too low. Am I missing anything on those memorials? Oh, yeah, there's an obelisk in New York, and then there was a bronze like placard on the cenotaph in London that later went to Shotwick Airfield, which is where the Royal Air Force Academy is, for number 40 Squadron. And I think that's everything. Yeah. So they were all minor, but the Aviator was the final pièce de résistance. That was her biggest project, and I think most important to her.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. You're welcome.
Any more questions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Augustus Lukeman was the Stone Mountain, Georgia, and Jefferson Davis in the Rotunda. In Statue Hall.
Washington, and we think that that was the relationship. That was the relationship in which Sally was trying to decide who could make the statue, and she had befriended in New York Jefferson Davis's widow.
Verena Davis,
And
right.
she said that Augustus Lukeman did my statue, you would enjoy it.
Yes.
And so that's how the reproduction was, and then it came here.
Yeah. And the cover of the book, things happen for a reason. I finished my dissertation in 2009, and I tried to publish afterwards. And a lot of places, a lot of college presses didn't want it because they said, oh, you're a Confederate apologist. Well, no, this is, history. And then when I got to Patrick Space Force Base, the image that you see on the book there is the clay rendering of the Aviator statue that Sally had sent to Mason Patrick in Washington, D.C. It's a photo of the clay rendering that Augustus Lukeman had done. It was in Patrick's papers at the Air Force Base where I was working. It was my collection. And on the back of it, it said, Charles Lindbergh, first to fly the Atlantic. Fortunately, it was in pencil. So now it's been fixed. And I donated it to the Space Force Museum there at Cape Canaveral so that it can be displayed and done properly. But it's never been published before, and so the editors really liked it and wanted to make that the cover. So that's the history of that.
You said one time when we were talking some years ago, you had talked about, and I couldn't hear very well up there, whether you said when in Wavre, France, they said this is where the grave was. But you really, in your research and some of the information down at WVU, express a little bit more about how she identified her son in digging up with these.
Right. So when she got there, she talked to the gravedigger. And there were only 4 deaths, August 1918 to the end of the war, and Lou's was one of them. So he was able to identify it. And she did was she wrote down on an envelope for the priest identifying features. And I don't know if I told you this part of it, but when I was doing my research, the gravedigger went in, found that he had been bandaged like he would have been, found broken knuckles, and cut off a lock of hair. And when I was going through the collection, I saw this ribbon, and with it was a little note, a souvenir for you. And when I pulled out the pin, a lock of Lou Bennett's hair fell into my hand from the grave, which I've never had that happen in research. It was very thick and very brown, and his hair was very thick and very brown. He had a good head of hair, unlike some of us today. But and on the directions, she also writes, what are the identifying features. The grave itself, the German War Cemetery, has been redone since then, but where he was buried was, they actually had a good drawing of where to find it. So. Anybody else?
Where was the company in Warwood and what did they do there?
It's the West Virginia Aircraft Company, and I think it's at the base of 21st Street and Hazlitt. I visited it back then, and it's right next to the railroad track. I think it's Pennsylvania Railroad, if memory serves. And so it's right on a direct line to the airfield in Beach Bottom. And so they were producing things like aircraft fuselages, landing gear, and in the picture in the book you can see the landing gear that they were making. And Lou's brother-in-law, Johnson McKinley, really thought that he had a future in the aircraft industry. And in fact, Johnson thought he should have stayed behind and run, basically arming the Army with aircraft, because Lou understood all the intricacies of it. They probably should have made him a colonel, and he could have like run all the aircraft factories and coordinated all that, because he really did have this deep sense of understanding. After the war, the government sold off their Air Force. And so getting like a Curtis Jenney trainer was cheap. Anybody could buy it, but it just killed the aviation industry in America. So Johnson converted the factory into a furniture making factory, and it lasted, I think, up until the Great Depression. And Sally ran the company for a while after Johnson's untimely death. So.
What degree did Lou earn at Yale?
He was studying law, pretty much. He was going to get into law, but he took languages like Russian. And in fact, Sally, one of the things she thought she could do to keep him out of the war was she wrote to the State Department to see if she could get him posted to St. Petersburg to the Russian embassy. So, but he took, I think he took German, French, I think they took Latin, Greek. At one point, I had a list of all of his classes. I don't have those anymore, but he was kind of going towards the law.
Any other questions?
And by the way, he left before they graduated, but Yale gave his class their degree after the fact. So, anybody else?
I'm just curious as how you were able to obtain all this background and the materials and where you went to get them. And thank you for telling us about the window in Westminster, because I've seen it, but I really didn't know the background.
Sure. So David McKinley did a paper on Lewis Bennett, and I read when I was younger, and that gave me a good background, a starting point. When I went to WVU after I retired from the Air Force, I went up to the West Virginian Regional History Collection on the 6th floor, which is this amazing collection of West Virginia materials. And I was looking for photographs, really, to see if I could find any photographs of Lou, the aircraft factory, et cetera. And like I said, Sally kept everything, and she donated it to the library there. She also donated stuff to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. I also went down to the State Archives in Charleston, where a lot of Lou's correspondence with Governor Cornwell was located. But like I said, Sally kept everything, and a lot of it was in WVU. And she actually did a trip to South America while he was at Yale, and she had whole boxes of just that, which was beyond my scope. I didn't look into it, but I just kind of glanced at it, and she had like drawings of sunsets and stuff from the ship, and all this like travel log. She was a very prolific writer and kept these things, and so it was a gold mine, treasure trove of information there. So that's kind of where I got a lot of this information and stuff. I did make some contacts at Yale. I got some of the things from his Yale alumni folder. And then for some of the other sources, it became very clear there was a Civil War connection. So I saw with Drew Gilpin Faust, Kurt Peeler, John Neff, Catherine Bashir, Leanne White. They helped provide some of the background information for the national level changes and things like that. So at WVU, probably 6 years. But then as I changed it and as I encountered more stuff, you know, it ended up being a project lasting almost to 2020. And then University Press of Kentucky did accept it. I still got, one of the readers thought I was a Confederate apologist, and it's like, well, no. But, you know. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a suggestion from your presentation. Sounds like you should have called that Balloon Ace and His Mama.
Thank you for that, because I did not choose the title. The original title was going to be In Stonewall's Shadow, because like the Civil War, World War I has kind of fallen into the background. People don't really pay attention. My wife and son went to Barnes & Noble to see if they could see Dad's book, and they went to the shelf, or the section that said World War I, and it was like 8 books, and then World War II. So when they said, we're not going to do Stonewall's Shadow because you're a Confederate apologist, I called the book Heroes and Mothers. And I called it that because one of the women who was writing to Sally while she was on her quest was saying how difficult it is to be the mothers of heroes, because we can't do the last sad things that a Victorian mother would do for their dead child. Some stranger from the government would have to do that. And we're having to live with the burden of having lost them, and it's just us, we're alone. And that's the title that spoke to me. And in fact, on my computer, where I have all my files and everything, it's H&M for Heroes and Mothers. And it'll always be that to me. Oh, I agree. But, you know, the editor says, oh, this will sell. Well, I get it. They want to make money. But it really is more than, and Lewis Bennett was so much more than just a great pilot and an ace. I mean, he was really this amazing young man. And I wish he'd have lived. He wanted to be the first to fly the Atlantic, and he was talking to his maintenance crew about how he was planning that. So, you know, just dead long before his time. He was really something, way ahead of so many other people. So, but thank you. I'm glad I'm not the only one who wished it had a different title.
Any other questions?
I just want to know if everybody here knows that there are 2 direct descendants here
yeah.
Today. David McKinley and David McKinley. This is David Bennett McKinley. David Bennett McKinley and his son David McKinley.
Yeah.
Sally's great-grandson.
And you look different with a beard. You look different with a beard. Yes. Looks good. My wife thinks it makes me look too old, but I can.
His grandchild is Lewis Bennett McKinley.
Very nice. And so his legacy's living on. And I just hope people here in the Upper Ohio Valley, Beach Bottom just dedicated a park up there near the airfield to Courtney Lambert, who was the first West Virginian killed in the Great War. He was with the West Virginia Flying Corps, and on his first sortie as they were coming into land, the aircraft stalled and crashed, and he died in the crash. And then, of course, we have the statue at Lindsley, and this November 11th will be the 100th anniversary of the dedication of the aviator statue. And it's in the New York Times from 1925 when they dedicated it. It was actually a photo of Lindsley up at Theta Place was in the New York Times with the statue. So that'll be this November. I think they're going to have a ceremony, if I'm not mistaken. So that'll be something to attend.
We're trying to get a flyover for biplane, but we haven't been able to locate a biplane yet.
Yeah.
If anyone's got a contact for a biplane, just for one day.
Anybody else? Well, again, thank you all for coming today, and it's really an honor to be here. Okay. I do have a few books to sell. They've been going pretty well. I've got one hardback cover left. I think I have about 8 more soft covers. So I could, sell books